All right, happy Monday and welcome to Spring Office Hours, episode number 2. Hello, DaShaun. How are you doing this morning?
Wonderful. I like our little intro. You put a lot
Yeah,
of
got a
work into
little
this, and
little
it's
music,
awesome. Yeah,
a
it's
little a
wonderful,
little
and it
DRM free
worked. It showed up
music.
live. I see the thing, so this is good.
Yeah, it's going good. Like I said, we will continue to make improvements to this show over the span of its lifetime. It's hard to get everything going right out of the box, so we'll add a little bit each time. So,
Yes,
how was your weekend?
my
Anything
weekend was
good?
good. My weekend was good. We had our soccer tournament. We had a little rain for the grass, and yeah, it was good. I think it was good all the way around. I had some Raspberry Pi devices show up in the mail,
I,
so
I
I'm
saw you got
cool.
those. I commented. I said I'm waiting for the blog post. So what's your
Blog
plan
post
with
coming.
these?
Blog post coming. Well, I really am just uh, going deep on the like, hey, it seems like overkill to run Kubernetes on something that only has 512 megabytes on it, but Kubernetes is more than like just the orchestration. It's also a nice way to just deliver uh, workloads, right? And I can do
Yeah,
interesting deployment models with those workloads. And yeah, I've gotten to learn over the last couple of years a lot about how ARM64 is being used out on the edge. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm enjoying it. I'm just having a lot of fun. Taking Spring Native workloads and some of these patterns and practices that we share. Yeah,
yeah,
taking them out to the edge as much as possible.
cool, fun stuff.
Yeah, all sorts of the sensors and devices, and that's another part is there's a project out there called Pi4j that allows you to connect to Raspberry Pi devices natively using Java. And yeah, I'm just kind of rolling that into Spring Native. So yeah, it's been
Cool.
fun.
I'm just throwing this out here because it's something I thought about, but I've never actually like looked into. I've always wanted to. So I have an office downstairs, and I got the kids upstairs and the wife, and they'll sometimes come down here. I've always wanted to get one of those like live on air lights. Like, hey, I'm in the middle of a live stream. Please don't come in the office.
Yeah, I had
Is
that.
that something
I
we could
had
do
that.
with like a? Do you do that with like a Raspberry Pi?
Yes, yes, you could absolutely do that with Raspberry Pi, and I had that. And I'll tell you, I was using the Hue lights, so I had the office area, the basement area. I had the Hue
Yeah,
lights turned to red, so that they
yeah.
know, hey, yeah, Daddy's on the thing. And what that actually did for my 3-year-old was, oh, Daddy's on a call. Let me go get on his lap. So yeah, it works.
Yep, yep.
Technically, it works, but yeah,
Anything you tell younger children not to do is exactly what they're going to do.
yeah.
I've learned
That
that
just it was
quickly.
the
So,
announcement that Daddy's on the camera. I need to go sit in his
yep,
lap and see who's there.
yep. I get that. Well, I still may look into it because the more streams I do, it's probably good to like say, "Hey, please don't come in right now."
Yep, it's just I think it's also just a fun little project to do for anybody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I said, I've been looking for something to do with Raspberry Pis. They're just such
Oh, I
interesting
got tons
devices
of
and so
Raspberry
many
Pis.
possibilities. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's even more fun now that you can do a lot of this stuff with Spring.
yeah. Now that we've gotten smaller footprints.
Mhm.
All right, let me
It's on the
share
calendar.
my
I heard a
screen.
rumor
Yeah,
that we've got some cool stuff
we
coming up.
have a very exciting week. But before we get there, let me just throw this on the screen. So if you don't know, we've made it to the big time, which is the Tanzu Developer Center. We are currently on episode 2, but if you head over to the Tanzu Developer Center and go to Tanzu TV and Spring Office Hours, you will land on this lovely homepage, which is right now going to do some Inception type stuff. But you can check out our past episodes and current episodes. One thing I did last week for the episode page is we have some show notes here. So we'll kind of take this as like a podcast scenario because we never know exactly where this conversation is going to go. But if there are things that we talk about that we want to kind of link to, we'll do so. So you can come back, a few hours after the show is done and check out the show notes. If you're watching the recording, you can check out the show notes, and there'll be links to at least the major things that we talked about. So we're over here. If you ever want to find out when our next episode is, it's not always going to be Monday morning at 10:30 a.m. I know we're leaving our left coasters out and our friends around the world. So we are working on that. I don't know about DaShaun, but I'm in the middle of conference presentation. I have 3 presentations I'm trying to get ready. So,
Well, I'll tell you this:
so
this office hours pattern for things like that. I liked to use the office hours pattern as a way to practice those things, right? So
yeah,
for our
for sure.
audience here that they're showing up, they're folks that are interested in what we do. Yeah, I would love to give them a an advanced version, a preview of the demo that I might run. Right, this is just a great
Yeah,
opportunity for that type of stuff, and I think it's more than just us what we're doing here, but also
yep,
as an example of what organizations are doing. Right, when hey, I figured out this new thing and I would like to share it. You do it in this kind of a format.
yep. And that, when we get into demos today, I have a demo that I can show off that is exactly that. I've been putting together presentations around GraphQL. We got a GraphQL question last week on office hours that said, hey, how can I do pagination? Well, during code last week and during just some writing and putting some content together last week, I put together a demo on that. And so we can kind of walk through that this morning. So yeah, definitely feeding the content calendar, if you will, for office hours. Speaking of calendars, I did say we have a big week this week, and we do. If you look at this, we are on Monday, May 16th. Tomorrow, Spring GraphQL 1.0 hits GA. I wish I had the push the button, yay, the confetti and all that. Because
That's
I'm
something we
just
got to
really
work on for
excited
sure.
about this. Yeah, yeah. I'm really excited about this. This is a collaboration between the GraphQL Java team and the Spring for GraphQL team. Just a lot of work has went into this. There's 7 milestone releases, kind of introducing some new things each time. Our socket support went into the last major milestone release. And so 1.0 is kind of the culmination of all these things. And there's just so much great stuff there. And I just can't wait to kind of talk more about it this week and over the next, 6 months. I have a lot of content planned. So exciting day for that tomorrow. And then on Thursday, Spring Boot 2.7.0 is released, which is important because to run Spring for GraphQL, you need to be on 2.7 and less than 3.0 for right now, I think. I'll have to double check that, but I know that's how it is in the beta. So even though Spring for GraphQL will be available tomorrow, you'll still have to choose a milestone 2.7 tomorrow if you want to use it.
I'm very much looking forward to taking this Spring Boot 3.0 milestone 3 for a spin. I do have some conference stuff and some stuff I'm helping get delivered for early this week, but I've got it on my calendar. I am going to take that 3rd milestone for a spin later this week. I'm super excited.
Yeah.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting because I haven't had much of a chance to play with Spring Framework 6 or Spring Boot 3.0. So I'm really interested in seeing kind of what's new coming up in Spring 3 or Spring Boot 3. I did see a video this week. Where is it? Here we go on Spring Framework. I'll kind of pause it. On Spring Framework 6, HTTP interfaces, just a way to kind of create declarative interfaces in Spring 6. So this is a really great video that kind of goes through the way you would do it now, whether it's using REST template or web client, and how Spring 6 is kind of adding this new feature, which looks really interesting and a really great way to kind of clean up some of the code that we use to interact with other HTTP services. So I'll add that one to the show notes as well. But I just thought of that because you mentioned Spring Boot 3. And like I said, I haven't been really keeping up with what's coming new. I need to get on that train.
Well, one
So
of the one things that we were doing earlier was around the Spring GraphQL. You were kind of showing like, hey, here's what it looks like. Here's what's coming. And I did a little rant about like that's what this should be. You should have somebody that's looking ahead for you
Yep.
and knowing like, hey, here's what's coming. Here's what's going to be awesome. Whether it's just the release notes or other, this what we're doing right here is also a place for you to get that early insight, right? Get that executive summary of what's to come and see some of those examples and start to think about how these new versions are going to help you going forward. So
Yep.
yeah, that's why I want to get yeah, get in and get understanding around Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
We'll have a
Cool.
demo
And
for that
then
stuff coming up soon for sure.
that's great. And then not to leave anyone else behind, but there's a whole bunch of other things going on this week. We have Spring AMQP, Kafka, REST docs, Spring Security versions. We have Spring Security 6 Milestone 4, which is going to align with Spring Framework 6. We have some Spring integration, Spring Session, Spring Batch, Spring Boot is going to get, I think, this might be one of the last, if not the last, 2.x lines. So 2.5, 2.6.8, 2.7. These are patch releases. This is the next milestone release. Certainly, I think this is the last major release of the 2.x line, because 3 is, not that far away. I mean,
Yeah,
we are
it's this
getting
year.
halfway through the year. So,
It's coming.
and we know that we have a release every 6 months. So 6 months from this date, you can expect somewhere around there, we'd have a new release. So looking forward to that. But yeah, I think that's it from a calendar perspective.
Yeah,
Anything else
I'm
you want
also
to
interested
say?
in the Spring REST docs. One of the things that I like to do in the past was just, yeah, the documentation that self-documenting code. I like that pattern for doing things. So yeah, I'm going to be taking that for a spin too. I just like to put that. I like to have that in the repositories that I share. I like to have just
Mm-hmm.
push it out there, like as that practice of here's what you just should be doing. Have tests, have some documentation.
Yeah, and I half remember doing some like just local demos with Spring REST docs. I've never really used it in production. So if you have a chance to show that off, I'd love to see that, because I'm with you. Working in the enterprise and asking the developers to document their APIs never really goes well. Like, you may get it at first, but it's a chore to keep up with. And that's one of the reasons I've been loving GraphQL lately, is because it is kind of self-documenting, and you get this documentation right out of the box, which is nice. So cool.
That's
Um,
that's something that maybe we should dig into is, the Spring REST docs. It's not just for REST. And I wonder what that looks like if, yeah, we're not just doing REST. Because it also has the HADOS, however you want to say that, HADIOS documentation. But then also for like event-driven architectures, you can do that as
yep,
well. So yeah, it might be a
yep.
good, maybe that's something we could do on code, like just kind of walk through like,
Oh,
hey, here's what it looks like when we're using Spring
yep,
GraphQL, and we want to document it further.
yep. Yeah, and if you're not aware and you're watching this, we do have another show called Code, where we get a chance to kind of walk through, just play around with something. This is much more like, this gives us a chance. I spent 2 hours last Wednesday just talking and going through some code and building something out. So whereas we show, smaller demos in this particular show, code gives us an unlimited amount of time to just hack away at something. So
I like watching
um, I know, me too. Last week what I ended up doing was, I was like, we haven't figured out a way to pipe in music. I just put on music for myself, and I'm like, hey, if I start dancing around, you know why? Like, I'm listening to music because I'm writing code for 2 hours. This is what I do when I write code. I listen to music. And halfway through, I was like, I'm glad you can't hear my music right now. One, it's a little vulgar, and two, you probably
Yeah.
wouldn't like it. And I reminded everyone that when it comes to music, I live by the rule of ABC: anything but country. That's my rule when it comes to music.
Interesting. Interesting.
Um, Good morning, Alex. Thanks for joining us. I think it was Alex's question that kind of spurred the GraphQL pagination question. So thank you for that.
Yes, Alex has been an early faithful, and we
Yes.
appreciate that so much.
Hello? Question mark. Hello.
Good morning,
We hear
Dash.
you. We are here.
Yes.
All right. I'm just over on the spring.io blog. I just want to remind you that this is here. There are some milestone releases for Spring Data. Go ahead and check out this post. There is a milestone for Spring Framework 6. Check that out. There is a new beautiful podcast with Easy Mock contributor, Java champion, and Java luminary Henry Tremblay. So check out that episode. And what I wanted to do is just run down into this week in spring. Josh kind of puts this together every week and every month of like what's new. And I just wanted to, there are a couple things in here I just wanted to point out. This is a what's new in Spring Cloud Gateway commercial. If you're not aware, there is a really good presentation from Chris Sterling. You know, I was able to sit in on some of these meetings that we have every Monday with the Spring team and just kind of see what was coming in Spring Cloud Gateway commercial. And he put together a really good presentation on that. So if you're interested in that, check that out. And I think that's really all I had. Yeah, I think that's all I had there. From my standpoint, I release a newsletter every 2 weeks. I moved it to every 2 weeks. I decided I just didn't have enough to talk about every week. So the stress of trying to get one out every week was too much. So I'm like, I'm just going to move this to every 2 weeks. And now it seems a little less stressful. I did put together a couple videos and blog posts one on the at value annotation in Spring Boot, two on some of the Spring Data pagination stuff. We're going to actually see that today because I wanted to do that first before we got into the GraphQL side of things because it's the same thing. Again, I talked about live coding. I did all of this stuff in a like 2-hour code episode. So if you want to check out that kind of unedited, and then I just talked about Spring Office Hours. I think that's all I had there.
Well, you brought up a couple of things that reminded me of something that I've been working on. First, the Spring Cloud Gateway. It's an amazing product. It's doing a lot of cool things. And one of the tools that I'm a fan of is called Open Rewrite. Have you heard of this? Open Rewrite?
I have, yes.
And what it has are what they call recipes for doing like migrations and upgrades. And what I've been doing, and this is, like behind the scenes stuff, DevRel, for my demos, I have my command line, Josh likes to go to start.spring.io. I'm going to use the command line Spring client to generate my package, generate my stuff with my dependencies. But then it's not always set up the way I want. So I'm using Open Rewrite to do things like add annotations or add a hello world method and simple things like that. So I've got these Open Rewrite recipes that I've been working on that can do those little things. And then just that idea with all the Spring Boot 3, Spring Framework 6 coming up, that idea of what is it going to take for me to upgrade some of these projects that I've got out there. So I've been leaning into that as one of those things that I'm going to use to kind of help move my stuff forward into the new and improved Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3. So yeah.
Cool. Are those kind of local right now, or do you have them out on GitHub yet?
I made that. I made a shell, Spring Boot or a Spring shell that's native, so I can use it on my ARM64 and my Mac and my Linux box. And I've got pipelines for all that, and that was great. But some of the things that I was doing in there was things that I could actually do a little bit better, a little bit easier with Open Rewrite. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out my groove for what I'm gonna do. So I've got the shell stuff out there somewhere. There's the Spring Native function demo. That's the rewrite stuff. I don't know if I've committed anything yet. But yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah, it's getting out there. Everything will land out there.
Yep, everything lands here on DaShaun's GitHub page, so make sure you are following him.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's what I've
Happy
been doing.
Monday to you.
Happy Monday.
Defines. Most people don't like to say that. I'm in his camp or her camp. I like Mondays. Mondays are an opportunity for a fresh start, a new week. Let's get productive, and we get to start off the week like this. So it makes me happy.
That's why I like doing this. Yeah. I'm in a weird spot where, yeah, Monday is the start of the week, right? I think on all the calendars, Sunday starts the week. But I think on a lot of the
Yeah.
calendars on computers, they always ask like, hey, when's the start of the week? Is it Sunday? Is it Monday? Kind of depends. I like to start the week on Monday. So yes, I'm a fan of Mondays. You always get to kind of start anew and get new goals. So yeah.
Yeah, I never understood the start of the week on Sunday. Like, yeah, you have a weekend. Like the weekend. Well, I guess I could understand that because not everybody has a Saturday Sunday weekend, but I think typically Saturday Sunday is the weekend, and yeah, like you just kind of recharge the batteries, spend time with people who you like to spend time with, and Monday's a fresh start. So yeah, I'm with you.
Indeed.
All right. Do you have any demos you want to go through today?
I have one that I think I could pull together, for sure, or I at least have stuff that I can talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to get started and go
Sure.
first? And
I'll let you go
then
first, and I'll get my stuff
Okay.
ready.
Okay, that sounds good. I am going to talk about the GraphQL paging stuff. Again, for those who were in the code session last week, this is going to be old news, but I don't think everybody here was in that, and we're going to do a much shorter version of that. So there is a GitHub repo here, github.com/danvega/GraphQL paging. The master branch has kind of the completed, here's everything that you need. There is a GraphQL paging starter, and that's what we're going to start with today. It's going to give us the application. We just kind of need to add the GraphQL bits to it. So I am going to go there. I have this pulled down in IntelliJ. And what I want to do is really just kind of talk through the existing application and then show how we can add the GraphQL bits to it. So this application is really just a model of what we're doing. This is like a CRM where we're storing some people and some addresses. So, with any kind of data-centric application, we kind of start with the model. Before I do that, I just want to quickly run down of what we have in the POM. We have Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. We have Spring Boot Starter GraphQL, Spring Boot Starter Web. We're just using web as the transport. And then I have this library called Java Faker, which we'll use to generate a bunch of fake data. And we're storing it all in an H2 database. So we have a person entity. So we're going to have a person table. That entity is going to have things like ID, first name, last name, phone number, email, and address. Address is a relationship to this address model. It's a one-to-one. One person has one address. One address belongs to one person. And that address is simply just an ID, address, city, state, set. Pretty simple model, but this allows us to talk about Spring Data JPA. So we have our entities. We have our primary keys. At the end of the day, we're going to have two separate tables in our database, one for person, one for address. We have a repository. So we have a person repository. When we create a public interface person repository, before we do any extending of anything, nothing is really special about that. As soon as we start to extend one of the repositories that Spring Data gives us, again, this isn't Spring Data JPA specific, it's Spring Data specific. So when we move to other Spring Data related projects, we have that consistent programming model. There are things like repository, CRUD repository, JPA repository, paging and sorting repository. So when we extend this paging and sorting repository, this extends the CRUD repository, so we get all the functionality of create, read, update, and delete, along with paging and sorting, which has these two methods for, as it says, paging and sorting. So we'll talk more about this in a second. So now we have this application, we need to get some data into it. So I have this sample data loader, which is a command line runner. So we have two interfaces in Spring that we can implement, command line runner and application runner, that basically start after, or this will execute after the application context has been created and right before the application starts. So this is a really good opportunity to, in this case, insert some data into the database. So you could, so the way this works is you implement the command line runner. We're going to override the single method in there called run. This is a functional interface, so it's a great target for a Lambda expression if you want to do it in a bean somewhere. I'm doing it in a method just because I have a lot going on here in a class. What I'm doing is I don't want just one or two records to kind of test out paging and sorting and filtering. You need a lot of data in the database. And so what I'm doing is I'm using this in-stream. So this in-stream range close allows me to say, let's go over a range from 1 to 100. And what I want to do each time is map something to an object. So I'm just creating a new person object for each iteration of that. And I'm using that faker library in there to create some fake data. And you'll see why this is important once we kind of load up the database. We're getting actual like fake data instead of first name 1, last name 1, email address 1. You know, we have some like real data going into the database. So we're doing this 100 times, and then we get to call this handy toList method. If you remember, you know, prior to, I want to say Java 17, you had to do this like collect and then collectors toList. It was kind of, it wasn't very intuitive what you were doing there. We got this nice method now that just says, hey, take whatever you've done here and turn it into a list. So because of that, I can return a list of persons. And the repository, remember, we're using that person repository, which extends paging and sorting, which extends the CRUD repository, which has a save all method. I could have just searched for it, but let's do it the hard way. I think I passed it. There's save all. So a save all takes an iterable of S. We call those entities. So because of that, I can pass in my list of people and just save all of these at once and save them to the database. So that's the kind of crux of the application. Let's run this. And I had an example in here of the command line runner as a bean. You'll see a lot of people do this in the Spring Boot application, the main application class, because at Spring Boot application at the end of the day is just a configuration class. So any configuration class, we can go ahead and look for beans. Let's go ahead and run this. I have some logging turned on for JPA. So you see a bunch of things going on in the background. Insert into. If we go back to the browser, we should be able to look at localhost 8080 and then go to the H2 console. And if we connect to that, we should see our 100 people in here. So now you see we have some nice data to work with. Actual email addresses, first names, last names. So if you wanted to do like sorting and filtering, you could test that stuff out. If we clear that, we should have 100 addresses in here as well. So that's the kind of crux behind the start of the application, which is, and I think I mentioned this last week, and this is something I'm really trying to push in the GraphQL presentations that I'm working on and that I'm continually doing, is that even with REST, a REST controller doesn't care about your data layer. You know, a REST controller is delegating that duty to whatever other layer you want. So whether you have a service class, in this case, I'm just calling the repository directly, the REST controller doesn't care about your data layer. It's delegating that work somewhere else. Sure, we have an endpoint here, but at the end of the day, that endpoint is calling the repository for the data. And GraphQL is the same way. The GraphQL layer doesn't care about your data. You can have Spring Data JPA, you can have Spring Data JDBC, you can write raw SQL if you want to somewhere in your classes. It doesn't care about that. It's going to, at the end of the day, delegate to whatever data layer you have. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add the GraphQL bits and then add a GraphQL controller for the paging and sorting. We're really just paging today. So the way that we do that, again, with GraphQL, we're going to create a new file in a GraphQL folder. I'm going to call this schema.graphqls. And I'm going to add that. And in here, this is where we're going to model our schema after, whatever we want to make available in our GraphQL API, right? So I'm going to put some things in here. Let's just do with the object types right now. So these object types are a way for us to say, there's a simple type system in GraphQL. And these are, most of the time, what we're creating are these object types to model our objects in our system. So as you can see, I have a person model that looks very similar to the person model in the Java, in our Java model package. I also have an address. So what we're doing here is we're modeling a person and an address. These are the fields that you can have access to in the schema. What else? The other things that we have are the top level root operations. So in GraphQL, we have queries, mutations, and subscriptions. Queries are for reading data. So if I want to read one or read all, if I want to filter anything reading wise, we're using a query. There is mutation. So anytime we're changing or mutating data, so that is save, update, delete, we're using a mutation. And subscriptions are for polling. So if we want to connect and leave a connection open, we can use something like WebSocket or RSocket. That's what we'd use a subscription for. So in this case,
hey, Dan.
DaShaun's popping in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I need to go and get a power strip. I'll be right back.
Oh, no problem. I got you. Okay, so we have a query. And what I want to do is I want to write a query that says, I'm going to return all people. That's the name of the query. And what that's going to return at the end of the day is a collection of persons. So person is referring to this object type. The brackets around here just say, hey, there's going to be more than one. So that is kind of the first query. We'll talk about returning all of them, and then we'll look at how we can add some paging in there, okay? So to get started, we'll just create a new Java class in here. I'm going to call this, I just want to make sure I'm calling it the same thing as the final code. We're going to call this person GraphQL controller. And what we're going to do is we're going to mark it with the @controller annotation. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in a method in just a second. But the first thing that we need is we need that person repository that we have created already. So we're going to get an instance of that by saying private final person repository. We'll call this repository. We'll ask IntelliJ is going to help us create a constructor with that as an argument. So this is going to get auto-wired in for us through constructor injection. And now we're going to create a method that is going to return an iterable of person. And we're going to call this, let's call this something else first. Find all. Return the repository. Now remember, paging and sorting extended CRUD, so we have that CRUD functionality, and we can start with find all, which just returns everything. Now we need to somehow hook this controller method, to the query that we've created over here called all people. So the way we do that is we use a schema mapping annotation that says, hey, schema-wise, let's map this method to the schema method that we've created in there. So first we start with a type. Remember, there are three top-level types, query, mutation and subscription. So I'm going to say this is a query. And then the value is, what is the name of that method in the schema that we created? So we could say all people. So this is a little bit verbose, kind of like we're used to in a REST controller saying request mapping. Here's the mapping. Here is the request method that we're going to use. The same way that we cut that down and we were able to add specialized annotations like get mapping and post mapping. We've also done this for the GraphQL side. So we can come in here and say at query mapping. Oops, query mapping. And now what this is going to do, if you look at this annotation, it's just going to say, hey, the type is obviously going to be a query because we're using this particular annotation. Now, the way that it derives this value is from the method name. So right now, this is not going to work because we have a find all method name. We have an all people query in our GraphQL schema. So if we just go ahead and change this to all people, those two sides line up, and Spring's going to wire this all up together for us. So if we were to go ahead and run this, and if you're playing along at home, you'll also have to just enable one thing in the properties. You want to enable that graphical user interface that allows you to test out your queries. With that in place, you can just go to localhost 8080 and graphical. And let's comment that out. So now we have this all query, or this all people query. And if we run this, we're going to get all 100 people back. So what we want to do is, you can see that I've already done that, but let's come back to that. What we want to do now is, instead of returning all 100 people, we want to go ahead and add some pagination. So the way that we do that is first from the schema side of things, we need to add a new, why that's there. So let's add something called all people paged. And this is going to take some arguments. So this is going to take an argument of page, which is going to be an integer, and a size, which is going to be an integer. And this is also going to return one or zero or more people or persons. So now that we have this side of the equation in our schema, we're just going to come into our GraphQL controller. We're going to do a similar thing. We're going to say query mapping. What is this going to return? This is going to actually return something different. We'll talk about this in a second. And then we'll call this all people paged because that's what we named it over there. This is going to take two arguments. So it's going to take it can be an int called page and an int called size. The way that we map these in the GraphQL world, so in the web world, kind of in Spring MVC, this may be something like a request parameter. So we had a @request param annotation. In GraphQL, this is going to be an argument. So we're just going to add the @argument annotation, and those will get lined up. So let's go ahead and return null for a second and jump back to this person repository and our paging and sorting repository. So there's two methods in here. One to find all that takes a sort argument, and another find all that takes a pageable argument. So if we look at pageable is an interface. We'll need to create some type of instance of something that is of type pageable to go ahead and pass to this. In Spring, there is a page request class. So if we look at page request, this extends abstract page request, which at the end of the day implements pageable. So that will give us the correct type that we're looking for. Page request has these nice static helper methods called of. And this very first one here says of, and then it takes a page and a size. So if we create an instance of page request using those two variables that we're getting passed in, then we should have what we need, right? So we can say page request PR is equal to page request dot of, and you see the different overloaded methods here. So we're going to pass in our page and our size. So the page is the page that you're on. So if you want to paginate, you start with a page like page 0, and then you start with a size. So give me the first 10 records. Then when you click like next on the UI somewhere, it would move to page 1 and give you then records 11 through 20. So those are at a minimum, those are the two things you kind of need to do pagination, right? So with that PR, now we can go back to our repository. Our repository has that find all method that takes a type pageable, and page request is of type pageable. So we can go ahead and pass that in. With that in place, let's go ahead and stop and rerun this. And what we're going to do is go ahead and write this out. So we're going to start with query. And we want to we got to refresh this to get the IntelliSense here. So all people paged takes a page. So we're going to say, let's start with 0. It's going to take a size. Let's do 3 records at a time. And then we still need to be very explicit in GraphQL with what we want to access. So what we want is, we'll take an ID, we'll take a first name, last name, phone number, email, and then an address is a type that has things like street address, city, state, zip. That's our query. Let's go ahead and run it. And as you can see, we get all people paged. We get a collection of 3. Now this is, so again, here's our 3 people, if you know. So we have Lorraine, Israel, Thomas. If we go ahead and say page 1, we're going to get 3 different people. So at the very least, that's how pagination will work. If we look at a page of persons, there's actually a lot more info that you can get back from this. And it's really then up to you of what you want to return to the client. So a page has things like total pages, total elements. There's a pageable. There's a whole bunch of extra information you can pass back to the client. Again, really depends on what the client needs to do as far as pagination goes. You know, there are helpful methods around like, is this the first page or is this the last? Those methods will be helpful if you're displaying like next and previous links. If it is the last page, you're probably going to disable the next button on the client. So these are all a bunch of variables that you can kind of customize on what you're going to return to the client. If you go through that code episode, I went more into this and looked at my website has, so I didn't implement the GraphQL side of things, but I'm using GraphQL on my website, and it returns a lot more of that information so that you can do that kind of pagination through it. So eventually I'm going to morph this and add on to this presentation that kind of shows you how you can return a lot more of that information to the client. But for right now, we're just saying, hey, give me a particular page, and these are the X number of things I want returned. So you can come in here and say 10, and now we're going to have 10. So that's the gist of pagination in GraphQL. I think, you know, again, what I've been kind of preaching from the beginning is that, like REST, it doesn't care about your data layer. So when I hear things like, how do I do this on the data side in GraphQL? There is no difference, right? When we talk about, if you were to swap out REST for Graph, in this case, I only had one API controller, so I'm deleting this controller and adding the new GraphQL controller and a lot of these methods are the same. If you look at like this one, I could have copy and pasted this over to my GraphQL controller and just changed a couple bits. Like again, we're not using request params because we're not in the web world. We're using an argument. But other than that, it's the same thing, right? So very consistent programming model, which I love, allows me to kind of swap things out like if I need to quickly. So I think that's my demo for today.
That's awesome.
See if there's any questions. I haven't been watching.
Yeah, I need to figure out how to boot one of those. And I don't have that login, but
Oh,
I'll keep on going. What I started talking about earlier was this kind of idea. Let's see if I can share my screen. I will do a Brave tab. How's that? Let's do this one. This idea of what I was doing for a long time, or what I was, seeing done and recommending, was a way for organizations to have a bootstrap project, like you would go to start.springer.io, but then have everything that you need for your organization, like certificates for uh, mutual TLS, or libraries that you use internally, your org, or default properties, whatever it is. I was recommending that you take that Spring Initializer project and kind of fork it and make it your own, so that you only are allowing your teams to start with stuff that's supported. So if you didn't want to allow Spring GraphQL because maybe there's nobody to support it, you would take that out of the initializer and not make it one of those options for your dependencies. And I really like that idea. But now I see that I have other options. The initializer project's a little bit hard to keep up with. And if there are upgrades upstream, you got to figure out how to pull those in and keep up. So I started moving towards this Spring shell to do some of those things. Is my screen sharing? I'm trying to see if my screen is shared. Maybe.
let me add it for you. Here we go.
We'll get there. There we go. And that idea of maybe I don't need to fork this initializer project. Maybe I want to have something in my pipelines, for example, that just adds those certs or libraries, etc. So that's kind of the path that I've been on. And because I do like to do things with Spring Native, that has been really, really fun. I get to do some of those fun tricks. So I'll do that now and just kind of show. This is kind of where my head's at, some of the things I'm doing. But again, this is now the time for Q&A. I'm going to just kind of walk through some of these things that I'm working on as an example. So hold on one sec. I'm going to share another screen. Let's do this one. And I got to make sure to add it. All right. So this is the idea here. I want to use the Spring CLI to go and create something. So very much like start.spring.io, I get a demo.zip, and I can unzip that. Yeah, let's overwrite that. So there it is. And one of the things that I was doing earlier this weekend is like I said, I had my little initializer plus plus. This is my CLI for things that I like to do. And I've given myself some things so that I can add a library like JGit or I can add Spring Native to my POM, or I can add Lambda function. Do these default things that I might do for a demo, or I want to hand to somebody else, but I'm doing it programmatically because I don't remember all the things like I should. So in this case, I'm going to make this a WebFlux function. I think I can do that. WebFlux function. So this initializer plus plus, that's the CLI that I wrote that's using Spring Native. It has all these cool things built in. And what this is going to do is it's going to upgrade my POM. Actually, maybe I should show that first. Let's do this. Git init and do a git commit. Oops. Let's do add. I want you to see what I'm actually doing. Right, and let's do this so we can get a nice little view. So I'm gonna stop sharing this one, and I'll share my IntelliJ, which might look a little bit easier. There we go. So this is the project we just pulled down. We just committed our changes. We got some stuff that's hidden there. But now I'm going to do my initializer++. I'm going to see what command I want to run. Web flux -function. This is just an example. These are things that I'm going to do out of the box because I can't, from the initializer, I can only get the, I can only get the cloud function. I can't get the specific web flux starter. So this is what I've done. My POM, and you can hopefully see the changes here. All I did was add this Spring Cloud starter function web flux. So my native command did that. I will show a diff. And I'm using just the org Apache Maven model. So under the covers, I'm using Java to modify this POM file. Where's my compare? Oops. And when it does that, anyways, when it does that, it actually reformats it. So that's the only thing I did was I added this web flux function. And that's just an example of what I like to do. So coming out of initializer, I could theoretically throw this shell script in to my pipelines and have it do things like modify a POM, add a dependency to a POM. And I didn't add that. Where did my screen go? Sorry about that. There we go. My POM file. So that was all that I've done is I ran this initializer++ web flux function. It modified my POM by adding a dependency that I couldn't get out of the start.spring.io, the initializer. So this is one of those changes. So I can continue to move forward with what I was trying to do. So that's really it. Just that example of I don't necessarily need to fork the initializer. I can do things programmatically in a pipeline, for example, with a shell command or with something like OpenReact, like I talked about earlier. That's where my head's at. So what I'm working on right now is an example. You're going to see that if you're following the AWS summits that are happening around the world. You're going to see an example of that later this week from one of our coworkers. So stay tuned.
Cool. Cool. You got me thinking here. Yeah, that's pretty cool. You got me thinking because so one of the things I do a lot is some full stack development with Spring and Java, and then Vue or React, whatever you like to use on the front end. To make that happen, there's some steps involved that, again, as you said, the Spring initializer doesn't care about because why should it? It has nothing to do with Spring, right? But it would be nice for folks who want to build these types of projects to go, all right, build me a web project, and I choose Vue. And instead of me having to tell you about the front end build tools that are involved to build your project, it would just kind of go ahead and do that for you. Then it has to modify the POM and add some extra dependencies in there, like the front end tooling, make sure Node and some things are installed. So that sounds like a good candidate for that. Is that not?
Yeah. So that you're kind of going down that same path. Like if we support Vue in our group, our org, you and I even, and we say, hey, yeah, I want to use Spring for my backend, but I don't want to know all the tooling around how to set up that Vue front end. And if we've got conventions in place, we could have a Spring shell, right? And for us, this is the thing that really kind of connected it for me is where I was comfortable using other languages, right? But something that should be like a 5-minute thing. If it's not my default language, it's not the thing that I'm working on a lot. Maybe it takes an hour. And see, oh yeah, it's simple. I just need to, modify a POM file. I just got to go find the XML parser, and that'll be easy. And then I got to go find. You just have to figure out those things if they're not automatic. By having this now, for me, Spring Shell in my toolkit, I'm not changing languages, and I'm getting that value of having consistent language, consistent paradigms and patterns across all of these things. And it's the one language that I use for my edge, for my CLI, for my pipelines, for everything. Everything's consistent, and it makes it really easy for me to switch from doing a CLI to a web app. Or I could use that same concept to bootstrap my view front end and say, hey, here's how it's going to connect. These are the properties that I want. These are the configurations that I want to expose. Yeah.
Right. I like it. I'll have to jump into that. I have no idea when, because my list of let's do this, build this type of thing is a mile long at this point, but I would love to work on that. So,
Well, so let me think this out loud. I'm setting up something for Odin, right? He's one of our amazing people out in the field. I've known him since before he started working for Pivotal, and we've been a fan, Twitter friends for a long time. And he reached out and he said, "Hey, I'd like to do something around Spring Native, and I would like to, yeah, and do it for this AWS summit that's coming up." I said, "Hey, that's a great idea. It's right in my wheelhouse, so let's do it." And I wanted to be able to deliver since he was on PTO. We didn't really get to collaborate up front yet. I wanted to be able to make something that he could take and do the exact steps, not a copy and paste, but just, hey, here's the steps to go. And I went down this path of using this initialize, the CLI to do it. So, hey, run this command, and you're going to get that demo.zip. Unzip it, run this next in this Azure command. Now you're going to have a Webflux function. Now here's your function, and I could even code that, and I'm doing that with OpenWrite. So it'll throw a function class, a hello world function in there.
Yeah.
And then there's it's that easy to create a serverless function. But then he's going to take it to the next step. Okay, what if I want to make it native? What if I want to deploy it to AWS? But I'm going to just set up these profiles, these Maven profiles, using these tools on the back end that'll make it so I can consistently redo that exact same thing, much like a demo, but I'm making it so that somebody else can deliver it. And if he wants to code it, he can do it live, but he'll have that consistent cheat code to go and deliver this thing. And it's that experience of being able to do a consistent demo. But then I'm also looking forward to that idea of if I was demonstrating Spring 2.5, like I've got some stuff in my repositories, and now I want to convert that to 2.6 or to 2.7 or to 3. I'm going to make these rewrites, these things that'll automatically convert it, but then I get to do it again, right? I can just take that exact same repository and I can repeat the process to show somebody in office hours. So it's just having those tools, those repeatable processes that doesn't take that much work when it's your native language.
Yeah. That repeatable process, I ran into this last week. I was updating a couple blog posts, realizing that, hey, I can actually update older posts because new things have come out since then, or I have a new perspective on this. Most importantly, some of these had like 1.x lines of Spring Boot on it, and I'd upgrade these repositories, and you gotta it's a very manual thing. Like, let's make sure it works. Let's upgrade it. It is a repeatable thing that I would like to automate. So.
Yeah, and it's super fun, and it works the way you want it to, and the recipes for doing those upgrades, that idea you can make your own. Like, you don't just have to use those; you can make your own. So even for your internal stuff, you can say, "Hey, yeah, we're upgrading from this to that." I've seen a lot of people fussy about Kubernetes, right, and the things that are changing. Oh, we broke this, we broke that, and I say you got to read the release notes. Like, why would you upgrade something if you didn't read the release notes to know what's changed? Because most of what's changed is all good stuff. How do you learn about that good stuff if nobody's sharing it with you? That's what this is for, right? This for our community. This time is for us to get those questions out, ask, but we want to share. We want to show you that path forward. So we don't want you to dump your head, but you gotta know what you're getting into before you go and take Spring Framework 6 or Spring Boot 3 for a spin. Come to office hours. Let us give you a little executive summary or read the release notes.
Always start with a why. Why are you doing something? Don't learn GraphQL because I'm telling you to, or don't run Kubernetes on Raspberry Pi because DaShaun is telling you to. But start with the why. Like, why would you want to do this? And then once you learn that, okay, now you have a reason to go forward and learn whatever it is that you're going to learn, because your time is valuable. Make sure you're spending it correctly.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. Do you want to jump into Q&A, see if we have any questions?
Yeah, I don't see any questions on there yet.
I
So yeah,
don't.
we can
Do we have
ask.
any questions out
Bring them.
there?
That's what it's for.
Yeah, let's hear some. And like last week, if it's a bigger question that we can't tackle right away, we will put together a demo for it for the next one if we have
Yeah.
time.
Anything, even if you don't have any questions, how about just tell us what you're working on? I'm very interested to
Yeah.
hear. Like, what's the problem of the day? Like, where are you at? What are you doing? Are you are you deploying to Kubernetes? Are you using GraphQL? What's your stack? Like, what does it look like? If you go to the initializer, what are the things that you always check? I always grab
Yep.
the actuator. That is important to me, and I would like to get back to always grabbing REST docs and cloud contracts. Those used to be kind of the core. But yeah, what are you working on?
I gotta say, I hope you can do this show outside more often. The birds are very peaceful. I feel at peace this morning.
Awesome, awesome. All right. Yeah. Well, I'm redoing my office. Yeah, I'll probably be spending more time out here. I wonder, can you hear the lawnmower in the background? Or
No,
they're doing construction.
no.
There's construction not too far away. I can hear it. But yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, just the birds.
Just the birds. That's wonderful then. Perfect. So it doesn't look like we have a whole
All
lot of
right.
questions, and that's okay. Hopefully,
No.
we're
Yep.
teaching you guys and yeah, showing you what's coming. We're going to be here, and pretty soon we're going to be here even more often, so we can reach some other audiences that aren't up quite this early, and yeah, we'll
Yep.
keep it going.
Yeah, and if you are one of those audiences who are still sleeping and not catching this live, that you could still ask your questions. You know where to find us on Twitter, at DaShaun, at the real Dan Vega. Please reach out. Let us know what questions you are. As DaShaun said, what are you working on right now? What problems are you facing in the Spring ecosystem? And we'll see if we can't tackle those.
Well, Alex is sharing, and we appreciate it. He says, I'm working on a demo that shows a technology stack for future development at work. It uses Spring GraphQL, R2DBC, Webflux, Apollo Client, and Vue.js. Look at that. Right, all the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, all the great things. I
Yeah.
love Apollo Client and Vue.js. I put together a demo on that. I don't know if I shared that out, but Apollo and Vue work nicely with GraphQL. So all good things.
Yeah, that is. And that idea of being able to share it for your team. Like, hey, you've got this concept of, hey, these are the things that I think we could do. I like seeing orgs that are doing that. I like seeing communities that are doing that. Like, hey, here's an example of what can be done, what's possible. Here's why you might want to consider it. And yeah, delivering it, sharing it with the world or the
Yep.
org so that you can get feedback on it.
Yeah, and that why is important. Make sure you're sharing why you would want to move to something like Webflux with R2DBC. The advantages that you have over Spring MVC, and especially probably problems that you've hit in your environment and what this fixes. And then things like GraphQL. Hey, we're just standing up a single endpoint now, and all these different clients that we have can just say, here's exactly what I want. I don't need nothing more than that. So great stuff. That's a good stack to be on. Hopefully that gets accepted. That'll be some fun development for years to come.
Yeah, and maybe you should throw in a client in there, a CLI that generates all of the connective tissue between that front end and the back end. Excellent.
Would
I'm
be
excited
cool.
to see it. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like there's anything else. Thanks, Alex, for sharing.
All right. Yep.
And everybody, I think we'll call it good. And we look forward to seeing everybody on our next show.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, a big week. Spring GraphQL 1.0 hits tomorrow, GA. So be on the lookout for that, and Spring Boot 2.7 later this week. Thanks for joining us on this happy Monday, and
Dan,
we will
good
see
luck with
you.
all the stuff that you're working on.
Oh,
Good luck.
thank you. Appreciate that. Same to you. Oh, good luck to all of our coworkers at KubeCon this week who are doing things. So
Oh, yes.
big week for VMware, Tanzu, our whole group. Lots of things going on there. So good luck to everyone there. All right. With that, we will see you in the next one. Happy coding, friends.